Israel and the diaspora. In light of the current and ongoing war, JPPI will provide daily in-depth analysis and insights from Israel. Yaakov Katz, former editor-in-chief of the Jerusalem Post and author of numerous books on military strategy and geopolitics, will open and moderate today's discussion. Also joining us live will be Shmuel Rosner, JPPI Senior Fellow Researcher and Political Analyst. Gil Troy, also a JPPI Senior Fellow, historian, author, and prominent Zionist thinker. And Jeremy Zakharov, former Israeli ambassador to Germany and Vice Director General of Israel's Ministry of Foreign Affairs. For our viewers, please ask your questions in the chat box and we'll get to as many as possible. Yaakov, over to you.
Thank you very much, Laura, and thanks for everyone for joining us. We're waiting on Jeremy. He should be here momentarily, but it's good to have Gil and Shmuel with us for now, and Jeremy will be here shortly. I'm going to start today's webinar. I had the opportunity to speak earlier today with Lieutenant Colonel Peter Lerner, who is an IDF spokesperson. He was the spokesperson during the Gaza War of 2014. He's now back in uniform in the reserves and is speaking to the world, going on TV, media, doing all these interviews. And we had a chance to catch up, hear from him what the latest is on what's happening, what are the goals of the operation that's coming and the operation that's ongoing, but also to look at what's happening in the media in a bit of a deeper way from someone who's on the front lines of that. So I'm going to play that for us, and then we will take back the webinar and continue with our conversation. So please, here is Peter Lerner. Okay, I'm really happy to be joined by Lieutenant Colonel Peter Lerner, not only a good friend, but really one of Israel's top spokespeople, was head of the international media department in the IDF up until a few years ago, has a lot of experience with Gaza, and we'll talk about that in a minute, because he was the spokesperson during the last large-scale ground offensive in Gaza in 2014. And here he's back again in uniform. So Peter, thanks for joining us at JPPI. We've been doing these daily webinars. Can you give our listeners, what is the latest? Where do things stand kind of just on a 30,000 altitude feet?
Yeah, there are three components I think that we're talking about now. First of all is still to regain control of the area of the surrounding Gaza Strip. Just yesterday we had another engagement with a couple of engagements where our soldiers met more terrorists still in Israeli territory, killing 5 of them. So it just goes to show there is still a real threat in the surrounding communities. The second component is rebuilding the barrier so that they can no longer infiltrate. So that is also something the IDF is currently doing, rebuilding the breaches, fixing the technology, making sure that there are enough forces on the ground in order to prevent infiltration. And the third component is obviously the offensive, the activities that we're doing now against Hamas, destroying, degrading, and obliterating their operational capabilities. So those are the three core components that we're doing. I would add perhaps a semi-component, which is not necessarily the IDF's focus, but also on a broader issue, but the issue of international support and international arena. And we've seen Blinken and President Biden and the world that is rallying, but there's also a level of military to military activities that are taking place, arms and armory and weapons and military support that is coming into Israel from the US. So there's a lot of activities there. Perhaps just one other thing is the readiness for the next stage, and that's a different component to what's happening now. Let's put what's going to happen next. And you heard a lot about the amount of forces that have been recruited to reserve duty, like myself, 300,000 or so. Huge amount of people, unprecedented number. But what's important about it is that those troops are for all of the arenas, because we need to be prepared for what the government directs us and instructs us to do in Gaza. If a ground maneuver is instructed, then we need to be prepared for that and have the forces to do that. There is concerns also with the Lebanese border. We've had anti-tank guided missiles fired at our forces there. We've had mortar fire from Syria. So we basically need to be very strong across the fronts.
So I'm curious, because of that institutional memory or history that you have, 2014, 2023, almost 10 years later, you're in the media. You're talking, you're going on, I'm seeing on CNN, Fox, BBC, you're doing all the rounds all day long. Is there any difference? Do you sense a difference today compared to back then? There's more sympathy maybe now? What's your sense?
I think there's a more empathetic attitude towards Israel. 1,200 people, you say that number, have been butchered and murdered. Anybody that considers themselves a decent person cannot be shocked by that number. That's not only a number, it's 1,200 families that have been torn to pieces. It's a nation that is bleeding. And so I think that the where we are today and on day 6 is a situation where people are looking at us, understanding that this is an unbearable reality and understanding that something needs to be done. I would say the similarities, obviously, of course, the concern for civilians in Gaza. Why are they to blame? And or why do they need to pay a price for their government? And the difference is today, I think, this offensive that was initiated by Hamas and their terrorists is slightly different to what happened in 2014. So they initiated on a wide scale, faceted offensive on the ground, at air and in sea. And it's, it obviously is a strategic plan that they'd planned for many, many months or years. And that, I think, is the difference. There's a different standing of where they're coming from.
It's been quite remarkable when you see some of the most experienced, veteran, tough journalists, anchors who are breaking down, right, on air. I've been at press conferences and watching the international, like, these are the top of the top, and they're sitting there and they're bawling when they hear parents of hostages and victims tell their stories, right? I've never seen that before.
We're taking them to see the communities. We've been to Be'eri, we'll be taking to Reim. You cannot remain calm and collected. It doesn't, if you do, you have no heart. Mm-hmm. And people are realizing, I think maybe there might be a bit of a conscience as well, because people have been giving Hamas, a free pass basically for many years, and maybe they have some little piece of conscience that is sitting on their shoulder saying, maybe we gave them too much leeway or room to maneuver. The situation, I believe today in that respect is, that nothing can prepare you for the visuals, the imagery, the tragedies. You can't believe that in a place like Israel, where we feel that we belong to the decent world, the decent West, that a situation like this would happen, and it's so close to home. And so many people, you heard it on Blinken's briefing when he was in his press conference today with Netanyahu, where he said, as a father, you cannot not be heartbroken. Yeah.
Peter, I want to thank you very much for joining us, and keep doing what you're doing, which is fighting the fight in the international media. So thanks a lot, and stay safe.
Thanks, Jacob. Take care.
So that was Peter Lerner, and I want to take the beginning of this webinar and talk to our panelists, Gil, Troy, Shmuel, and Jeremy, and do what we've been doing over the last few days, and get just what is the big headline, or what's the big story that you see over the last 24 hours that's taking place as we head into the weekend. And hopefully hopefully it'll be quiet. No one can know what Shabbat's going to look like here, especially after what we saw last Shabbat. But what's that big story? And also, I could just say, and maybe this is just one thing that I came across, but there was this wonderful audio recording that was going around that you press play, and it is Am Yisrael, I'm a chayal, I'm a soldier in Gdud, whatever, and I'm asking you got to come save me. I need your help. You have to come and take all the food and all the underwear and all the socks that you've been sending me. I have too much. Come take it back. And you just see this beautiful arvut hadadit, right? This just coming together and taking care of one another. So if it's a story about that, or it's the headline in the news that you're seeing, give it to us in kind of 60 to 90 seconds. Gil, why don't you start?
Hi, I got the opposite video saying, oh, we need so much deodorant, and then seeing piles of deodorant, and oh, we need toothpaste, piles of toothpaste. But on a more sober, but yet inspiring note, I've been sharing this ongoing trauma of the loss of our friend Ben. We went to his funeral yesterday, and we discovered that he didn't die like a lamb being led to the slaughter, but he died because he was at the festival, and instead of running away, he was an army medic, and he started administering first aid to people and was killed then.
Wow.
And immediately it changed the narrative. And over the last couple of days, we've started hearing a second narrative. October 7th was the slaughter, the carnage, pogrom imagery, Holocaust imagery. But within minutes, we're now hearing on certain kibbutzim, within minutes on certain army bases, there was a mobilization. And whereas Hamas won the first battle, we within minutes mobilized. And that's why Hamas didn't succeed in holding on to the Gaza Strip, in holding on to the Gaza communities. And immediately it shifted into a Zionist narrative. The Zionist narrative is not one of perfection and not one without its cruel and heartbreaking moments. But the Zionist narrative isn't just of the Jews being steeped in misery, but also us always fighting, defending ourselves, and winning. And I think that's what we're seeing. And we're going to hear more and more, and by the way the press has to do more and more of not just reconstructing a 5-minute video in the Wall Street Journal, which was very, very moving and very, very important, about how 260 people were killed at a concert festival, but also to see how minute by minute, through WhatsApp groups, through informal connections, through just sheer well-trained bravery, our citizens became the first line of support until our soldiers were able to mobilize.
Right. Shmuel?
Well, first I must say that my son is very happy with his new underwear and socks. He's stationed in southern Israel and was very glad to receive these packages. So keep sending them. It's fine. A war is a complicated, multifaceted affair. And if I try to separate the signal, to see the signal amid all the noise, I think today's most important event is the closed meeting between Prime Minister Netanyahu and the Secretary of State of the United States, Antony Blinken. He came to Israel today. They had a meeting one-on-one. Of course, we don't know what was said in that meeting, but in many ways, the message that the Americans convey to Netanyahu gives him a sense of his room for maneuver in the coming days and weeks. Clearly, Israel is bombing Gaza. The bombing is extensive. It is watching what's happening in the north. It is receiving the full backing in a very moving and powerful way of the US administration. However, Israelis are experienced enough to know that such backing and such international support has a time frame. It will not continue forever, and Israel must decide for itself what are the clear goals that it wants to achieve before such support begins to erode.
Right. Ambassador Issacharov, Jeremy, great to have you with us as a guest. It was hard to get in touch with you. No, I'm joking. Jeremy and Laura are married. But Jeremy, please, your 60, 90-second kind of big story of the last 24 hours.
Well, there's so many facets of the story, but I'll take it on an emotional level and then on a more political policy level. I went over the social media, and you see the pictures of women, mothers, shielding their kids who were killed, and children, a 3-year-old taken as a prisoner to Gaza. And I just, emotionally, it was almost too difficult to bear. And I can imagine that the actual picture of what has happened is even much worse than what we are seeing and what others, even the social media, is showing. So on that level, I think it was very overpowering. I was incredibly impressed, as already been mentioned here, by the incredible bottom-up citizen activity across the board, bringing supplies and also working together in so many different areas, thinking about the people who've been taken and are as hostage now, well over 100. I don't know exactly the number, but the tens and well over 100 hostages that are being held in Gaza. I mean, one can't even get one's mind around how families must be thinking about that. And the last thing that I thought, and feeding into what you said, Yaakov, in the beginning about Arvud Hadadit, I watched very closely the speech of Antony Blinken, the Secretary of State, and I was really moved by, I am not just the Secretary of State, I am also a Jew. And his background and his parentage from the Holocaust, and I was very moved by that. And coming on in the wake of the President Biden's incredible gesture and speech of support, I was very moved by that. And look, the key factor that we're facing today is not only dealing with events on the ground, but we have to say Israel's deterrence was damaged in a very severe way. And we have to shore up our deterrence, and America will be there. We have to do this ourselves, but we need America as well. And I am very conscious of that, strong Israeli-American alliance, which has never been more crucial.
So I want to talk about that in a moment. I mean, there was the Trump speech from last night, which I'm sure all of you watched, and you got to hear how smart Hezbollah is and how Bibi, tried to take credit for the assassination of Qasem Soleimani and whatever else he had there, all the beautiful things he had to say. And you kind of contrast that with Biden. Obviously, we're not going to get into any internal US politics. But I do think to an extent, and maybe I'll start with you on this, Gil, is President Biden has set a new standard, it seems to me, of what it means to be a pro-Israel president. What Jeremy was talking about, Blinken, right? His comment, which you don't often hear from a Secretary of State, right? They don't want to, they don't shy away. They know they're Jewish, and everyone knows they're Jewish, but they don't openly talk about being Jewish, right? This is a new level in that type of lack of daylight. I don't know, for lack of a better term. What is this, people want to say, oh, it's just politics, they're going to an election, he needs to be strong, people would blame his policies. This seems like so much more than that, right?
I actually think one of the most extraordinary things about the speech that Joe Biden gave was that he didn't seem to care about politics. He wasn't playing to the election, and he wasn't playing to any kind of polls. There was a way in which you could see that he was really shuddered, and he was really moved, as you were saying earlier, about these veteran newscasters. And I think it's really important what he did, because he showed that, first of all, even in a highly divided, highly partisan America, there are moments which transcend politics. There are moments of principle. He showed that even with all the noise that there is around the Israel issue and the wave of accusations that we've endured for so many years, and the growing problem in the Democratic Party of anti-Zionists, that wasn't going to stop him. And He spoke like a moral leader, and he spoke like a statesman. And I think it was actually a really very powerful moment, and it was a tremendous gift to Israel and the Jewish people precisely at our moment of weakness. And if I can get just one last thing, and this pains me to say, I'm comparing his speech to the mealy-mouthed word soup coming out of university presidents' mouths. How they are so afraid to say anything other than we regret the violence and the conflict, and they use the word to kind of hide any kind of moral condemnation of Hamas, God forbid. And the fear on university campuses of a small group of very aggressive pro-Palestinians. And then you see Biden standing up and saying, no, this is how you do it. And my other hero was Bono, who did the same thing when he talked about the concert goers as my people. And we have to start using those role models to say, that's how you show empathy. That's how you show leadership. And by the way, that's how we win, because this really is a civilizational conflict. And we keep on saying this, completely true. This is a fight not just against Israel, but against democracy, against liberalism, and against civilization itself.
It's also words matter, and you're seeing this, by the way, just in parentheses for a moment, what's going on with the BBC and in the UK is just shameful how they won't use the word terrorists. You got the royal family who's calling them terrorists, right? The UK government has declared Hamas a terrorist organization, but the BBC they're militants. But Jeremy, I want to go back to you for a moment. You spent a lot of time in the U.S. You were the Deputy Director General of the Foreign Ministry, in charge of strategic matters and affairs, so well-versed and well-experienced also in the United States. And then we are going to talk about Europe. But what you're seeing coming out of the U.S. and the way you mentioned deterrence before, but I do also have this feeling, it reminds me kind of the Second Lebanon War, that when we didn't do as well as people thought we were going to do, it was a blow to the way we were perceived in America, right? Among our friends, the military, the CIA, intelligence agencies, et cetera. Is what happened here doing the same, do you think? Are they now looking and saying, what, we thought the IDF was better, we thought the Mossad was better, the Shabak was better?
I talking to some American friends, there's obviously been the comparison between what happened and 9/11. And also, America was the strongest nation in the world and maybe in history. And it was also overcome by an unexpected low-tech, I don't know how to say it, but an attack that was not foreseen by any means. And no one is invincible. And I think from that point of view, they understand that we can be very advanced and very high-tech, but there are ways to get around it. And Hamas used its weakness to find the ways around it. So from that point of view, I don't think that's the point. Let's not forget, America has 25 citizens that have been captured in this and perhaps killed, more than that. So beyond the issue of being, a very strong ally of Israel, there's a very serious interest here. Second of all, there's a major overlap in terms of how you see Hamas and how you see ISIS. This has been said very much by the Israeli establishment at this point. And I think actually the things that I'm hearing that have happened on the ground in the kibbutzim have been even worse than what ISIS has done. So I think that, when they talk about, as Gil said, the war of civilization, America totally sees that this cannot stand. And they see that Israel obviously will respond. And I think, it's not just a matter of words. It's a matter of, the sending of the battle carrier group led by the Gerald Ford. I mean, this is 100 tons of deterrence, and it's a war fighting machine, probably the most advanced in the world and in a class of its own.
Yeah.
And this is a clear message to Hezbollah and Iran: don't go there. The president said it very clearly. And I think, America here has very deep, profound strategic interests of its own, as well as being supportive of an ally. And our fight is their fight. And, just as their fight in 9/11 was ours, shoulder to shoulder.
Yeah. Shmuel, it was only a matter of time till Trump would say something, right? And he is the gift that never stops giving. And there we had it last night. I think it was at an Iowa rally. Does this war that we're seeing, what role? I mean, you've covered a lot of these elections in the United States. You still go back. You still go back because you have that addiction, and I get it. But how much will this war play a role in the election cycle that's playing out right now?
Well, I'm not sure it's going to be to play a big role in American election. We are more than a year before election day, so up until then, hopefully, we will get to a point in which Israel could once again become a more marginal topic. I would not want to think that Israel will be at the top of the news from now until a year from now. But trying to continue what Jeremy and Gil started with, the issue of deterrence, I'd like to add one more layer. When you have barbarians at the gate, there are two types of barbarians that you must deal with. One is the 12th century Mongols, and then they come to take your country away from you. So that's a clear danger that you must deal with. Then you have the 9/11 type attack of people who can harm you, who can harass you, but they are not an existential threat. The 9/11 attack was not an attack that could take away America's force. And we must say Hamas attack on Israel earlier this week was not in itself an existential threat to Israel. Hamas is not a powerful enough force to conquer Israel or to take Israel away from us. Losing Israel deterrence, that's an existential threat. For Israel to be seen as a weak party, this neighborhood at this time, with Hezbollah in the north, with Iran, with all the other parties, that's the existential threat. So Hamas, the attack by Hamas should be taken or should be seen in two different contexts. There is the context of having to prevent Hamas from killing our citizens, and that's an important goal. Then there is also the strategic consideration, and this goes back to the issue of deterrence. Israel must regain its stance as a powerful player in this region, because being seen as weak, that's existential, and that's why the war we are about to fight is an existential war.
I'll say something that's a bit, I guess, probably a bit controversial, but I think what happened now, because of with the massacre on Saturday, what it's done, and with the world now recognizing what we've been saying for decades about Hamas, right? And how terrible they are, and whatever, worse than ISIS. It doesn't make those comparisons mean nothing. That's what they are, and they have to be destroyed. We have this legitimacy now to flip the equation on what's happening in Gaza and go in there in a big way, and whether it's a week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks or longer, try to take down Hamas. But what sits in the back of my mind is I don't know what's going to happen with Hezbollah, and everybody wants to contain this conflict, keep it just in Gaza, not have Hezbollah erupt. But there's a part of me that feels that, okay, fine, so we take down Hamas and whatever the outcome is. But if Hezbollah is still there, and they can do in a year from now or half a year from now or 2 years from now in the north what Hamas did on October 7th in the south, then we will have to continue to live with a sword over our head. We have to change the equation across the region. And maybe the opportunity that we face today as a result of what happened is exactly this: to completely flip the paradigm, not to have to contain conflict anymore. I don't know. To me, I'm torn on that issue, because I know everybody's like, no, we don't want to go. And Jeremy, that's where I'm coming to you. How do you see this?
Well, I think that what was said is you're right on the money in terms of how this link of our deterrence must be preserved. I think also that the fact that we've tried, and I think one of our major mistakes that led to the systemic mistake in Yom Kippur and 50 years and 1 day later to the Black Saturday that we just witnessed, was that we overly try and judge the intentions of our enemies. And there are intentions and there are capabilities. And I think by putting too much emphasis on the intentions, we tend to give them a dignity that, that stems from our logic, but is not their logic. And I have been thinking very much on this exact point on the last few days, that, as you're right, I mean, the force that Hezbollah has compared to Hamas is massive in terms of firepower and all the range of other capabilities. And we know they have this capability, and we are going to be in a very great dilemma now. Do we make some sort of preemptive strike at some point and not allow that sword to be dangling over our head? Because in the end, it'll fall. And we can't assume, that they rely on their good intentions to keep it, there. This is the problem of deterrence. And it's a very, Shmuel, I agree with what Shmuel said, but it's like a link in a chain. And Israel has to have deterrence that is valid in Iran. It has to have a deterrence valid in Damascus, in Beirut, in the Dahya, in Hamas, in the south, in general in the area. And one break in that link, even if it's not the most important link in that chain, can have massive ramifications. So that's my take on it. And the bottom line is that, we're going to have to think long and hard of the situation with Hezbollah. Having a sword over our heads is not a way to run a business.
No,
If I could jump in there, if I may, just to extend it to a flip side, which is I've been thinking a lot about the fact that for years we've been going, especially to the United States, to the American Jewish community, to the UN, saying, look, we're really not that bad. Look how nice we are. And I think our message to our friends, and especially to our diaspora Jewish friends, has been, we are going to do what we need to do to survive, and you're going to do what you need to do to make us look as good as you can. But the days of trying to make policy vis-a-vis Hamas and vis-a-vis Hezbollah so we look good and we look Western and we don't look like we live in the Middle East, I think must be over.
Shmuel, we have a national unity government. Benny Gantz is back. They got the old gang back together again, right? Bibi and Benny. Now there's Gadi also, right? The only one who doesn't have an E is Yoav, but Yoav Galant. Benny Gantz came in this, I'm guessing with eyes wide open, right? He doesn't trust Netanyahu. Netanyahu does not trust him. They do know how to work together. They have respect for one another, right? We all, just to remind our listeners or viewers, Netanyahu was the prime minister for pretty much the entire duration of Gantz's tenure as chief of staff. And they worked together when he was defense minister in his government in 2020. Do you think that this, obviously we can look only at what's happening right now, but does this last beyond the war, in your opinion?
Well, first we must say about this government that better late than never. It took them too long to get to the point of forming this emergency government. It's good that they did it. I think this government has two different roles. One is the professional part of it. You add more people with military experience, two generals, Benny Gantz and Gadi Eisenkot, to the mix, so you have more experienced people helping the prime minister with the conduct of war. That's an important thing, but that's not the most important thing. The more important thing is the message that you send by forming such government, both to Israel's enemies. Look how serious we are. We overcame our deep political differences to come together to fight this war against you. And also it's important in the domestic context. It is important to show the people in Israel who are all tired of mischief and of debates and deep rifts within our society. It is important to show them that in this moment of crisis, we can put all these things to the side and come together. Now, can I tell you a straight face that I trust all the leaders involved be past the stage of making political considerations? To be honest, I'm not sure that's the case. It took them long days to get there. So there is still suspicion that some of the players, and we must, admit, the prime minister is more suspect than the other side, than Benny Gantz, that political considerations can still play a role when this government is formed. And it's important to make sure that this government operates smoothly and does not become a mechanism through which one side can blame the other, or the other side can blame the first side for misconducting the war. This should not become a blame game between two partners, and that was the case in the unity government of Netanyahu and Gantz a few years ago. Right. This should truly be an emergency cabinet for the conduct of war. And that's why I think the question if this can last the war is not that important. If they can function smoothly throughout the war, that's more than enough.
Jeremy, you want to say something about politics? Because then I do have a quick question for you. So
yeah, I'd love to. First of all, I think it's important that the government, this emergency government, has been formed. But I think it doesn't vitiate the need to have a very major commission of inquiry once the hostilities have ended.
Yeah.
And even the chief of staff said today We are charged with, protecting the citizens of Israel, and we failed. And this needs to be investigated once all is done. So I think this is one factor that should be borne in mind regarding this government. Second,
By the way, you know who hasn't said a word of taking any responsibility?
sorry,
I said, you know who hasn't taken issued a word of responsibility?
I don't think, that's not surprising to me, but I think, the general feeling in the public is going to be have a very devastating answer for him on this question. And I don't think it's going to be so easy to evade responsibility for this. And the fact is that the one important factor is that they said this government will only deal with the war, which means that the judicial nonsense, which has, in my opinion, shattered our national security over the last 9 months and been one of the reasons that we ended up in this situation, that has been shelved. And I think that's first of all, a critical importance, also critically important to the Americans. And so from that point of view, I think it's important that this is formed. I'm going to be very sanguine about my expectations, but I think, look, I have a tremendous amount of respect for Benny Gantz. I worked with him in Washington and with Gadi Eisenkot as chief of staff. I think they add a tremendous weight of responsibility, and also to bring calm minds into a very complex situation. And I think I just want to say one sentence. It's critical, that there's going to be, as the pictures come out, there's going to be a lot of emotional turnout to Israel must respond and Israel must do this and that. First of all, we must decide what we do carefully, cautiously, and find our own timing and not be a prisoner ourselves of the pressures. When will the window close? When will it be open till? We need to actually, find our time to make the most devastating response possible.
So I made a commitment that we are stopping sharp at 6:40. But before we do, and we're going to break now till next week, and we'll reconvene. So we're going to be away Friday and Shabbat. We have Gil Troy here, and he can give us some words of inspiration as we go off for the weekend, Gil. So just, you know how to do it.
Look, it's been the worst week of our lives. And indeed, we have many, many more funerals to go. But I also think that once again, we remembered that the politicians can let us down, the defense ministry can let us down, the IDF can let us down, but the people will not let us down. And we're reading these stories of people from left to right who put all their politics aside long before the government was willing to do it, and understood that this is in many ways an existential fight. And I have to say that as difficult as this week has been, I haven't had one moment of embarrassment. I am so proud of my people. I am so proud of my state. I am so proud of the Jewish people who have rallied around us. I'm so proud of liberal Democrats throughout the world who have seen and been able to recognize the difference between good and evil. And we know that things won't be easy, but we also know that we will prevail. I'm Yisrael Chai.
Amen.
Laura?
This has been a JPPI Daily Inside Analysis. Tune in again Sunday at 1800 Israel time, as our rotating roster of experts will communicate with you through this daily webinar and a subsequent podcast available on Spotify and Apple Podcasts for as long as the crisis in Israel continues. Additionally, many individuals from abroad have asked how they can directly support Israel at this time. Contact us at info@jppi.org.il, and we will promptly respond with relevant information. Good night from Jerusalem. Shabbat Shalom.
Thanks, everyone.